Hello, Raspberry fans! Welcome back to today's stream. And today we will be reading the next 2 chapters of Sunsets and Freedom by Annex. I hope you all are doing well today. I'm doing very well. Usual self, a bit sleepy. But I'm so excited for us to continue reading this story together. Let me change that, shift out there. Let's see, making sure the microphone is on. Test, 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 test. Okay, good. I think we're all set. And I still haven't found another background music I want to use for reading these streams, so hopefully this isn't going to be too Doki Doki Literature Club like. Yeah, and I think without further ado, let's just get into it. So last chapter we left off with Tommy passing out and throwing up a bit because there's something infused, some like poisonous metal infused in his gloves. And yeah, that's where we left off. And I am pretty sure he either woke up or is about to wake up. I don't remember what else happened when we ended the last chapter. Just, I think Tommy realized he's gonna have to tell the truth, and he had some pretty bad dreams. Okay. This is chapter 9. And it is called, Maybe If I Tell the Truth, My Lies Will Kill Me for Telling Them They're Fake. And our trigger warnings are abuse, non-consensual drugging, blood/injury, and one brief mention of self-harm. Let's dive right into it. Please forgive me if I stutter, hesitate, or mispronounce anything, and for any noises in the background. Let's go. Both Wilbur and Techno knew that their dad was mad when he called them back upstairs with only 2 words, upstairs, now, and then hung up. Now this could mean a billion things. He could be mad at Tommy, he could be mad at them, he could be mad at something completely different, but the point was he was mad. How mad? They couldn't say. At first, any kind of Phil's anger, whether it was an intense like someone killed someone or something like Wilbur forgot to take out the trash for the 8th time that day, it always seemed the same. At first, anyway. Once you actually talked to him, it became clear what kind of anger you were actually dealing with. Despite being very nervous about what this whole thing was about, Wilbur hoped it wasn't something small. Wilbur had been in the middle of a very important conversation with Eric when Phil came on over the intercom. He had been very confused and needed Eric to clarify things, but when Phil sounded like that, both of them knew that Wilbur shouldn't wait. Eric had left, promising to tell him more and clear up as much as possible when Wilbur came back. If he came back, Eric had added with a wink that he hadn't lightened the mood as much as Wilbur wished it did. The conversation had been very heavy, and if what Eric said was true, things were about to change forever. So despite feeling bad and hoping for the worst, Wilbur hoped for the worst. That conversation could have been the most important thing in Wilbur's entire adult life. He was not even exaggerating. Seriously, it could have changed society's entire mind as well as his own company's and family. Although it did make a large pit grow in his stomach and kind of made Wilbur feel like trash. Although he was trying to focus on the good parts of the news instead of wallowing in his own guilt. Ronbu and Tubbo were already there, sitting on the couch, although they were tense. Not enough that it worried the twins about them, but they were confused as to why they were so tense. But the twins then noticed that the 2 kids were whispering. What scared them more than that, and that scared them more than that message. They had known Phil was mad, but the 2 of them were unsure what was happening. The fact that they were whispering and not openly talking about what they thought was going on meant that either they were in trouble or this was something much bigger than originally thought. Phil appeared from down the hallway and he was fuming. He was absolutely mad, and they hadn't seen him like this in a long time, or possibly ever. If steam could come out of his ear at that moment, it would be. Honestly, it was terrifying, if only because they had no clue why he was so mad. Neither did Tubbo or Ronbu, apparently. Whatever this was, it was intense. What happened? Techno asked, braver than anyone else in the room. Phil's wrath was not something you wanted to turn on you. Only Technoblade had been able to ask why he was angry. Everyone else wanted to prevent him from getting upset at them. Sit down, Phil replied, not even acknowledging Techno's question. The 2 looked at each other for a split second before rushing to the couch and sitting on either side of the 2 kids. Phil sat in front of them on the chair and stared at them. What happened? Tubbo blurted. Phil let out a breath. I got Tommy to tell me basically everything, Phil admitted, and I'm not exactly happy with everything he said. Did he? Is he a bad person? Ronbu asked, worried that he had trusted Tommy too fast. No, Phil said. I'm not mad at him. I don't think I could ever be seriously mad at him anymore. The kid's been through some deep stuff. Oh gosh, Tubbo mumbled. What happened to him, Phil? Wilbur asked, steeling himself for anything that could come out of his mouth. Well, flashback. Tommy broke down sobbing, his entire chest heaving as he cried. Finally, after who knows how long, letting himself openly cry. It had to have been too long for the sobs to shake his body as much as it did. More tears streamed down his face, more than Phil had ever seen before, and he had seen his twins lose one of the most important people in their lives. Tommy's cries were anguished and heart-wrenching. Phil wanted nothing more than to hug him, but he knew it probably was not the best idea right now. It would only make him pull away more. My containment center wasn't a containment center, Tommy gasped out between the sobs. Okay, breathe. First, and then you can talk to me. Do you want some water? Phil asked, not expecting Tommy to tell him everything right now. Apparently he was going to. Tommy shook his head and started to take deep breaths. This wasn't a panic attack, but he definitely had started hyperventilating. Once he mostly calmed down, silent tears still stemmed down his face. Phil gestured for him to continue. It wasn't a containment center, Tommy admitted. What was it, Tommy? Phil asked gently. It was called the compound, and it was anything but a containment center, Tommy told him. Phil nodded. Can you elaborate? They took us when we were really young. It was just me and my friend. I don't know how. I can't remember, but we were toddlers, I think. Neither one of us could remember our families or parents, Tommy told him. We were taken because of our powers. He wanted to use our powers. Who? Phil asked. Dream, Tommy muttered. Phil blinked. Dream? He asked. Tommy flinched at the name but nodded. Like green hoodie and a mask? Tommy's eyes widened and went pale. Whoa, we don't work with him or even know him. We just know someone who does. I promise you, you're safe. It's okay, Phil said. Tommy visibly relaxed, but his heart rate definitely raised too much above the normal and probably safe level. How? Tommy asked. Our coworker. His adoptive son is friends with him. We have no idea he was doing something like this, Phil replied. Tommy shifted but nodded. He used us, Tommy said quietly. He forced us to do things we didn't want to do. He trained us to do anything he said, and if we didn't, we were severely punished. Tommy. He made the scar on me. I was cut, hit, beat. My friend was drugged up almost the whole time to keep him from using his powers. We were kept 5 floors underground and kept chained onto walls. Mine were plastic since it would be harder for me to disintegrate, he muttered. Phil noted that he caught himself up in a lie, but didn't comment on it. Not yet. Right now he needed to know more about what Dream was doing. Did he drug you too? Phil asked. I think a couple of times, but nowhere near the amount of my friend, Tommy told him. He wouldn't only punish one of us if something went wrong. It was always both of us. We worked better when one was threatened. I missed a camera once. That was when Dream was about... That was the dream That's what the dream was about, and I was punished daily for 2 weeks. We only had 1 meal a day, too. Not to mention he banged up my friend as well. You're malnourished, Phil commented more to himself than to Tommy. A note for later. Get as much food as possible, without upsetting him, into Tommy. Regular meals would probably be a godsend. He patched us up before he was done so we wouldn't get sick. We were basically objects to him, but we were so valuable, Tommy said. What did he want, Tommy? Phil asked. I don't know, Tommy cried. Hey mate, it's okay. Don't worry, you don't need to know, Phil assured. But I should. I stole. I was the one that was mostly sent on mission things, Tommy exclaimed. What sorts of missions? Phil asked. That's why he needed us, Tommy muttered. He needed someone to help him get stuff or cause chaos or something. He would take one of us on a long car ride where we'd be chained to the back of the van or for sometimes hours. It was almost never both of us. Only once that I can remember. What did you do? He made us, Phil, Tommy cried before starting to sob again. People were so understanding and I hate it, he screamed. Tommy, it's okay. It's all right, Phil said. I don't care what you were made to do. I promise I won't be mad at you. You were kidnapped and were threatened daily. I promise you it's going to be okay. He made us kill people, Tommy choked out. I never wanted to, I swear, but we could never leave any witnesses. Dream said it was too risky, and I apologized to the people, and they were so understanding, and I hate it. Their screams echo in my head and their eyes when they see a child being forced to do this. I can't do it, Phil. Hey, it's okay. I'm not upset with you. It's not your fault, and those people understood that. They knew you weren't a bad guy, and that you were being forced to do this against your will, Phil told him. Can I touch you? Tommy hesitated, but nodded in the end. Phil put a hand on his arm, gently. I never wanted to kill them, but I had to. Dream would know if I didn't, Tommy sobbed. Phil nodded. Tommy disintegrated things. If he touched a person, it literally would not leave witnesses. It's probably why things about Tommy never made it to the news. They were careful and covered up every base possible. I know, Tommy, Phil said. The fact that you were so careful around us and cared enough to make yourself sick to wear your gloves shows us that you are such a good person, no matter what he made you do. Do you understand that? I can't, Tommy whimpered, hating the way his own voice sounded. It's not something I can just think. I've killed people, innocent people, Phil. They didn't deserve it. If I just turned around and hit Dream and said, maybe they'd still be here. We both know that wouldn't have worked. It takes time for your powers to work. Dream is speed, Tommy. It would have only hurt you and those people would still be dead. It's not your fault, Phil said and moved his hand to Tommy's face, cradling his cheek in his hand. You didn't deserve what you went through either. It's a miracle you made it out, let alone with enough sense to know what was happening was wrong. What? What? Tommy said. When people go through that much training and conditioning, they often believe whatever cause they're being forced to fight for. You didn't, and you understood that what was happening to you and your friend and those people is wrong. You were so strong, Tommy, and you need to understand that, Phil said. How could someone believe that? Tommy asked. How could Dream do what he did? Phil asked in return. Tommy only nodded. How old were you when this started? Phil asked. Tommy tilted his head. When I was taken or when the mission started?
The missions, Phil clarified. 7, Tommy replied. I was 8 when it had been a year. I still couldn't stomach the missions and when Dreams stopped feeding me before them, so I would stop throwing up. I was always covered in dust or blood or something and I hated it. Tommy, I'm so sorry, Phil whispered. No child should ever have to see things like that, let alone be forced to comply. I hated it, Phil, but he'd hurt us and he'd kill them anyway. I could only do so much for the two of us and he was the same way. When it was my friend's turn to do things, he was the same way. We could only lessen things for each other and ourselves. We tried so hard, Tommy told Phil desperately. He was still afraid that Phil was going to hate him. We had plans to get out, to survive, to live in a penthouse together. All he wanted was to see the stars again, and I don't know if he ever did. What happened to him, Tommy? Phil asked. He was given away, Tommy trailed off. You can stop looking for him. It's not worth the resources. Please, just stop looking. Back to the present. Then I told him to go back to sleep, and I've been waiting for you guys to come back. Phil looked at the boys in front of him. Tubbo and Rambu had tight grips on each other. Rambu had been crying, and Tubbo looked like he had been cried about it. Like he had to cry about it, too. Wilbur also had tears falling down his face. His hand covered his mouth as he leant on his knees, not wanting to miss anything Phil had said, despite the fact that he had been sitting the closest to him. Techno was always fuming, just as Phil was, although it was good to see that he was still in control of himself. If Techno lost himself right now, Phil doubted that Tommy would ever think that Techno didn't hate him. It would be a lost cause between the two of them. He went through all of that? Ranbu asked, his voice cracking. That was nothing like a containment center. Just because Tommy went through something doesn't mean you can invalidate your own trauma, Rambu. Don't compare the two. It doesn't matter. It was still trauma, Techno reminded him. His grip on the couch tightened as he spoke. I know, I'm just saying, Rambu muttered. Containment centers are about suppressing your powers, not using them for their own personal wants. Not to mention the punishments, Tubbo muttered. I can't. How did he survive that? I don't know. I'm sure Dream was smart enough not to give either of them a chance to hurt themselves, Phil stated. Tommy's strong. To go through the conditioning he did at such a young age. He said he was a toddler when he was taken. Who knows how old he actually is. Companionship, Techno stated. They stared at him. What? Wilbur asked. He had a friend. He probably attached to the friend and noticed that how they were being treated was wrong. So when he was also treated that way, he might think he deserved it, but it's still wrong because of how Dream treated his friend too, Techno explained. Tommy had a moral compass. Every kid does, even at that age, and he knew it was wrong. He just only held on to it because he had a friend there. That makes sense, Rambu muttered, having his own experience with being held with other people. I'm not positive, but I think Tommy mentioned he was older. Maybe he knew the abuse was wrong from being on the outside longer and taught it to Tommy. Phil said. Gosh, I can't even imagine a child having to do all of that. I can't imagine anyone being forced to do that, let alone someone as young as Tommy was, Wilbur huffed. I hate to be the one to bring this up, but there are holes. It wasn't the whole truth, Techno said. Can you blame him? Tubbo exclaimed. No, but I think things are missing. The least we can do is ask. Ask about what? Rambu asked. If he and his friend were so important, why did Dream give away his friend, especially if he was an S level? Why was none of this on the news? An entire facility dies, even if they were turned to dust. They all went missing and no one thought it was suspicious? I hate to say it, but Techno's right. Things aren't exactly adding up, Wilbur sighed. Are you saying he lied? Phil asked, arms crossed. I don't care how good of an actor you are. You cannot fake what I saw in there. No, not at all, Techno assured. It's just that we're missing some pieces. Something that ties this whole thing together. I don't know what it is. None of us do, but we're missing something. I don't want to agree, but it's the only thing that makes sense right now, Wilbur admitted. Phil sighed. I guess you're right. So we're going to straight up ask him? Rambu asked. I think it's better if we're straight with him. He's not going to like being babied, and I don't think we need to. Now that we know nothing has changed, Techno said. Everything has changed, Wilbur exclaimed. No, nothing has, Techno said much more firmly. He's still the same Tommy, just now we know what his triggers are. We knew he had trauma when we took him in. It's just that now we know what it is. Just because we know doesn't mean we should treat him differently unless he asks. Techno's right, Phil added. He's strong and a stubborn kid. He'll hate being coddled or something. Sure, we can show a little more affection, but nothing sugary or fake. I know it's different, but after the containment center I was in, still the same. I I know it's different, but after the containment center, I was still the same. But I just wanted to be close to people. I didn't want to be treated like a child. I had been through things that children usually don't see, if any... don't. So, sorry guys, I'm messing up. I had been through things that children usually don't, so if anything, coddling would have been harmful to me, Rambu said. Okay, I get it. I wasn't going to baby him, Wilbur muttered. You would have, but I think you have regardless. So, Tubbo shrugged. Phil and Rambu both snorted. Skip a little into the future. Phil led Tommy back to the living room. Tommy was okay. Despite his passing out the day before, he was just a little shaky and tired, but he could still walk to the living room and meet everyone there instead of his room. We just wanted to ask some questions, Phil said. If you don't want to answer, that's fine. But we just want to help, okay? All right, Tommy said, shifting as he sat in front of everyone. It was a bit uncomfortable. After I told them what you told me, after you said it was okay, we had a few questions. Mostly things that didn't quite make sense to us. So we just want to make it clear, okay? No one here is mad at you either, Phil said. Tommy nodded, feeling a little bit better than before. Why did Dream give your friend away? Techno asked. If he was an S level and you guys were important to what he needed to do, it doesn't seem like it would be a smart move. Well, I don't know exactly, Tommy said, and it wasn't exactly a lie. Not quite anyway. I don't really want to talk about it. That's fine, Phil said. What about the news coverage? Wilbur asked. Things this big need news coverage. What happened? Look, this could all be explained, but you'll hate me if I do, Tommy cried. No, Tommy, we won't, Phil assured him. You don't even know what I'm going to say. You can't know that, Tommy yelled. Tommy, what happened to you was traumatic. You were just trying to survive and help your friend too, Phil told him. But you don't know, Tommy exclaimed. No, we don't, so tell us, Phil said calmly. I'm the Witherer, Tommy sobbed. Wilbur's eyes widened. Flashback. I got through, Eric said. Wilbur almost dropped his water bottle and choked on the water he had been drinking. I'm sorry, he gasped out. Eric smirked at him but shook his head. The revival process wasn't perfect, but I was able to bring back a spirit of one of the more recent attacks of the Witherer, Eric told him. What did they say? Wilbur asked, rapt attention. Wilbur, it wasn't fully back. He was damaged and definitely not fully there. He was mumbling his entire time. I couldn't make anything he was saying out. Wilbur deflated instantly, but banged his head on the desk. This is hopeless, he muttered. Until, Eric said. Wilbur picked up his head and looked at Eric like a child would like when watching TV show. I mentioned the Witherer. It was like some sort of switch was flipped. He instantly perked up and nodded at me. What did he say, Eric? What happened? Wilbur stuttered. He couldn't speak in full sentences, and he seemed to know that. He kept muttering the same phrases over and over again. Not his fault, and save. I was confused, so I asked again. The Witherer, his killer, and he still insisted on those phrases. Eric let out a breath. What if we were wrong about the Witherer and he's been forced to do things? I understand you've already been looking into the possibility of a secret S level. Perhaps that is the one controlling him. Oh gosh, Wilbur muttered. He's being forced to kill people. I do try to be an optimist, but isn't it a good thing he's not evil? He isn't killing for fun or even because he wants to. He's just trying to survive, Eric told him. He wouldn't have had to if we had just stayed with us. If he had paid more attention to his behavior and if we had known, Wilbur cried. Wilbur, stop. This isn't helping anyone. We know that the Witherer isn't the issue anymore. It's whoever the hell is controlling him. They are the bigger problem and we need to figure it out, Eric said. Wait, we should go over this again. Did you get a recording? His mutterings, the spirit's mutterings. Maybe we can make it out together. It may give us something, Wilbur said. Eric shook her head but pulled out a tape recorder. I got it, but I cannot make sense of it. I'm not sure if it's English or if it's just too quiet for us to understand it, but we can try. The intercom buzzed and both of them froze when Phil's voice filled the room. Oh gosh, he was freaking mad. Oh, thank goodness, Wilbur breathed in the present. What the frick, Wilbur? Oh, sorry, that sounded really awful. Wait, no, I had a conversation with Eric. But before we were called up, they had come up with another tactic to speak to, Tommy's victims. But it was strange and hard to make out. My power kind of kills it, Tommy muttered. What is your power exactly? Techno asked. Tommy blinked. I think it's called drain. I drain the energy from things. If it's people, it's their energy to their life force until it's nothing left, including the spirit apparently, he muttered. When it's objects, it's the conductivity, really. It's the force that keeps them together, and then it sort of destabilizes and turns to dust. It takes longer for objects than people. Where does that energy go? Wilbur asked. Into me, Tommy replied. When I touch my arms or myself in general, I can feel my own energy cycle through me. It's grounding, I guess? Wilbur, what did Aerith say? Phil interrupted. Oh, well, the spirit was pretty unresponsive until Aerith mentioned Tommy. He got really interested and repeated, not his fault, and save, until it disappeared. We were discussing looking further into it and also decoding his mumblings, but I guess we don't have to anymore, Wilbur said. Tommy shrunk into himself. You're an S level, Tubbo whispered. Tommy cringed at himself. You're an S level, Tubbo yelled, hugging Tommy. Tommy hadn't flinched or anything, but for the life of him, he couldn't figure out why he was being hugged by Tubbo. What? I knew there was a reason we clicked, Tubbo exclaimed, tightening his grip. I'm sorry, what? Tommy repeated. When people are the same level, they tend to drift towards each other and become close fast. However, how fast and how close tends to increase the higher you are. S levels tend to bond for life since there's so few of you, especially born this close together, Phil said, smiling at them. Tommy noticed Rambu shift and looking like he wanted to join, but Tubbo was kind of in the way. Tommy sighed. Come on, Ranboob, Tommy muttered. Rambu smiled and didn't think he'd ever want to hear that nickname, but it was kind of growing on him. Later that night, Phil pulled Tommy aside, assuring him for what felt like the millionth time that he wasn't in trouble. Why do you want us to stop looking for your friend? He asked him. I'm sure we can find him. Our resources extend out of the country. Because he's dead, and I just want confirmation, Tommy told him plainly and walked off to his room. Phil sighed. If they had both been S levels, like Tommy had said, his death must have killed Tommy. The bonds between S levels were often stronger than any type of relationship. Tommy's the Witherer, Phil muttered. Yeah, Techno let himself trail off. You know what that means, right? Wilbur asked. And that's the end of the chapter. Da-da-da! Tommy is the Witherer! I don't know if you guys are keeping track of a lot of this story, but I was like, what? Tommy is this supervillain they've been talking about throughout the whole story, periodically? And he's not an evil supervillain. He's just being forced to do things. And that makes Tommy's friend the Prophet. But what could the Prophet's powers be? And who is this Prophet? Okay, next chapter. Chapter 10. Is family a scam, or do I just need to find the right people? Trigger warning for implied child abandonment, kidnapping, but otherwise it's a fluffy chapter. Wilbur peered into the alleyway, gripping the corner tightly. He wasn't afraid to go down there or anything. It was just, well, the alleyway was dark, and you couldn't be sure what was down there. Not to mention, if someone was going to fight him, he wouldn't even know if someone was down there. Techno peeked at the other corner of the alleyway. Are you going to go down there, or are you too scared? Techno taunted. Wilbur gasped. I'm not scared, Wilbur exclaimed, offended. You have the fight foresight. Why don't you go down there first? No, there's no one down there to fight, Techno shrugged. How do you know? Wilbur asked. What if there's a big scary man who wants to eat children like us? We're in double digits. We're not children, Techno told him. Wilbur rolled his eyes. You know what I mean, he hissed at his twin. Besides, as the older sibling, I say you go first. You're not older, Techno muttered. Uh-huh, Wilbur mocked. I'm older by 3 minutes, so there. 3 minutes doesn't count, Techno pouted. It does too. It was the best 3 minutes of my life, Wilbur hissed. You don't even remember it. Yeah, I do, Wilbur huffed. It was wonderful, all the attention on me, and it was quiet, and then you came screaming. I don't believe you. I don't care. You go first, Wilbur demanded. Techno rolled his eyes. You know what? I will go first because I'm not a coward, Techno declared and walked into the alleyway with his chin up. Well, I'm not either, Wilbur exclaimed, still standing in his spot behind the corner. Then come in here, then, Techno teased. Phil said to stay out of alleyways, Wilbur huffed. But you were the one to command me to go, Techno told him with a fake innocence. I never commanded you, Wilbur crossed his arms. You told me to, Techno answered. If I told you to jump off a cliff, would you? Wilbur answered. Stop stealing Phil's lines, Techno demanded. Besides, I would because you'd probably jump after me. Shut up, Wilbur mumbled. Are you coming or are you too scared? Techno asked. Wilbur trailed in after Techno. I told you I wasn't scared, Techno said. And Wilbur nodded. A whimper pulled both of their attention. They froze and slowly turned to further face in the alleyway. Was that? I think so, they whispered. Wilbur went first this time, using the flashlight on his phone to illuminate the dark areas. Techno was looking around as well, focusing on the parts of the alleyway that the flashlight lit up. It was easier to make out objects that they would eventually find if they kept flashing the light everywhere. Suddenly, Wilbur gasped and rushed further in. Wilbur! Techno hissed, following him, but soon stopped dead in his tracks when he saw why Wilbur had stopped. In front of him, squinting in the bright light of Wilbur's phone's flashlight, was a child. A baby, if you would. Not an infant, but maybe a toddler? He whined at the light, and Wilbur quickly shut it off and bent down at his level. Hey, are you okay? Wilbur asked. The kid shook his head and peered up at the two with the biggest and bluest puppy dog eyes that either of them had ever seen. I want him, Techno said. Wilbur hit his leg lightly. Shut up, the kid whined again, and Techno bent down beside his twin. It's okay. Don't let mean Wilbur scare you. He's harmless and a coward, Techno told him. The kid smiled a little bit. Hey, Wilbur exclaimed. You want to come with us? Techno asked. The kid looked at the two of them and slowly nodded. Both Wilbur and Techno beamed, and Techno reached out his hand for the kid to take. He jerked away from it. No, he shouted. Techno blinked and looked at Wilbur, who only shrugged. I don't know anything about babies, Wilbur huffed. Neither do I, Techno replied. Looky, the kid explained, and took a hold of a newspaper. Nothing happened at first, and Techno only raised an eyebrow at the kid. The kid frowned at Techno and shook the paper to get his attention again, and soon the newspaper turned to dust before the two of their eyes. The twins' eyes widened. You can do that to anything? Techno asked. The kid thought for a moment, but nodded. It's okay, Wilbur exclaimed happily. I cannot touch your hands if that's okay. Can I pick you up? The kid nodded and did grabby hands at Wilbur, who once again lit up. Wilbur picked up the kid and shifted the kid so he was facing outwards and his back was pressed up against Wilbur's chest. He looks like Phil, Techno commented, still having a soft smile on his face. We have to go show Phil, Wilbur exclaimed happily. Phil? The child repeated. Wilbur and Techno's jaws dropped. They both smiled. Yes, Phil, Wilbur encouraged. Nice, kid. You'll have him wrapped around your finger in seconds, Techno smirked. The kid giggled and clapped his hands. How old do you think he is? Wilbur asked. I'd say 4. Children start being able to say the F sound around the age of 4, Techno told him. Wilbur stopped and looked at his twin. How do you just know these things? Wilbur asked. Techno shrugged. Come on, we have to go show Phil, Techno said, running ahead. He's probably worried anyway. Hey, wait for me! I'm holding a precious cargo! Wilbur yelled and followed Techno, trying not to jostle the kid in his arms. The two pushed their way through the crowd, looking for the familiar wings of their adoptive father. There, Techno said, pointing to him. Wilbur brightened and the two rushed over. Phil, we found a child! Wilbur exclaimed, running up to him. It was probably the last thing Phil thought he was going to hear out of his kid's mouth. A what? Phil asked, turning to see Wilbur holding a small child in his arms and Techno standing next to him, both of them smiling with bright eyes. Wilbur was lucky he and Techno were tall for their age, otherwise he'd have a hard time holding on to this kid. A child, Wilbur exclaimed, holding the small kid out for him. Can we keep him? Phil, the child exclaimed, almost definitely being taught that from the twins. But Phil couldn't help the feeling in his chest when he heard the kids call him that. Please, Techno asked. He even looks just like you. They weren't exactly wrong. The kid's hair was a little more yellow than Phil's, and his eyes were a paler but brighter blue than Phil's own, but he could honestly pass for his kid. Does he have parents? Phil asked. The twins shook their heads in unison, and Phil wasn't sure if that was Wilbur's powers or just a twin thing. It was freaky nonetheless. We found him in the alleyway, Wilbur said, like the child was a toy or a dog rather than a whole human being. By himself, Techno added. Phil sighed and looked at the child, who was now giving him what Phil could only describe as the most convincing and mesmerizing puppy dog eyes he'd ever seen. Fine, he sighed. Phil reached out for the child. No, he cried out and tried to wiggle back towards Wilbur. He wasn't successful, and Wilbur was glad he didn't drop the kid. You can't touch his hands. He turns whatever he touches into dust, Wilbur exclaimed. We asked about everything and he nodded, so it's safe to assume to people too, Techno added. Can you hold him for me safely? Phil asked. Wilbur nodded and shifted the child so his back was facing Phil, and Phil took him from his son. You want to go home? Phil asked the kid, and the kid nodded. I'm tired, he said, wiggling a bit but letting Phil hold him. Phil smiled and gestured for the twins to follow. I don't have a car seat. One of you will have to hold him, Phil told them. Me, they both said. Phil laughed lightly at them, and the kid mimicked Phil, making him smile again. You got to hold him on the way here. Let me hold him, Techno yelled. Wilbur crossed his arms and rolled his eyes. Fine, he huffed. Phil shook his head fondly and went to the car, with one kid more than when he came. Do you know your name? Techno asked the kid as they sat on the floor of the living room when they arrived home. The kid refused to be on the couch or anywhere besides the floor, really. Yep, the kid chirped happily, poking at a ball Wilbur had found in their shared room. They didn't need to share a room, but neither would sleep without the other in the same room. What is it? Wilbur asked. He was lying on his stomach, his head being held up by his hands. No, the kid replied, obviously not wanting to tell him his name. Why not? Phil asked. Why not? Wilbur asked. Meanie, the kid's nose scrunched up. We're mean? Techno asked. We just wanted to know your name, he muttered too quietly for the kid to hear. No, the kid cried out. Meanie says it a lot. Someone's picking on you? Wilbur asked, sitting up properly. The kid paused for a moment but nodded after a minute. Yes, he answered. Don't worry, I can fight off anyone, Techno said. It's my power. And I'll protect you too. If anyone gets through Techno, they'll have to get through me first. Not to mention Phil too. He's super strong. Phil has wings, the kid exclaimed. Big ones. Yes, I do, Phil said, walking into the living room with the kitchen. And I can fly with you if you want. The kid's eyes widened in awe, practically having stars in them, and he nodded, almost violently. Phil smiled and picked up the child and lifted him over his head and flew him all around the living room. A child's laughter filled the house, alongside the other three members. His laugh was contagious and made everyone else's laugh and chase each other around. Despite being a very happy family, especially recently, it hadn't been a while since it was filled with this much laughter. Too bad it hadn't lasted. Phil woke up to a scream. He didn't think before launching himself out of bed and rushing towards his children's room, almost running into Techno on the way there. It had been almost a week since the kid had come in to join them, and the kid still refused to tell them what his name was, although Phil couldn't help but think that they were close to getting him to speak. What happened? Phil asked Techno. I don't know. It was Wilbur, Techno exclaimed, and the two of them rushed off to Tommy's room. They found Wilbur sobbing on Tommy's bed. What? He's gone. Someone took him, Wilbur wailed, tears still streaming down his face. Someone what? Phil demanded. Look, Wilbur said, holding out a piece of paper that had, thanks for the powers, written on it. Oh my gosh, Phil muttered. What are we going to do? What are we going to do? He's gone, Wilbur cried. We'll tell the police. Don't worry, they'll find him. They hadn't found him, and it had been a week. Most children kidnapped don't make it past the first 24 hours, let alone a week. It wasn't looking good for them, and the police were starting to stop looking. Other cases taking priority. They all grieved and coped in their own ways. Phil remained strong presence for his sons, but secretly his heart ached for the small, giggling child that looked a little bit like him. Techno went mainly nonverbal, opting to speak to basically nobody but Phil and Wilbur, and if he did, it was just clipped and slightly rude. Phil didn't bother to correct him when he was being mean to others, unless it was Wilbur. Everyone copes in their own ways, and it just so happened to be Techno's way of dealing with it. Wilbur, however, cried. He cried a lot, sometimes to Phil, a little more to Techno, but mainly he would just lock himself in and there sometimes into their music room and cry for hours at a time on bad days when he couldn't look in Phil's eye without seeing the star-eyed child. There were always bad days. Good days became the norm after a bit of healing and a couple of therapy visits. Wilbur picked up a guitar as a healthy outlet for his emotions. Techno started opening up a little bit more and was now much more socially anxious, a little afraid to become attached to someone again. Phil doubted that they would ever fully go away, but all in all they healed together and decided to do something with their lives. Thus, a private, mostly legal business was born, saving children and young adults from containment centers, although they all knew that the others also hoped to find their puppy dog-died child in one of them. That was until the Witherer came around. Back to the present. Training. They were training. Well, they were more play fighting, attempting to use their powers as advantages. It was all a 1v1v1, so it was more like chaos. Chaos was 3 teenagers, 2 16-year-olds and a 15-year-old, all 3 who held more power than anyone else in the world, equaled only to each other, playing an intense and possibly deadly game of tag. Miss me, Tubbo teased as he rolled out of the way from Tommy's touch, barely dodging a well-placed teleport from Ranbu. Tommy charged at Ranbu instead, who simply teleported again, this time to the rafters. You can't stay up there forever, boob boy, Tommy called, looking up at the ceiling. Ranbu stuck his tongue out at him and Tommy just barely moved out of the way before Tubbo caught him. Dang it, Tubbo hissed, charging again. Ranbu dropped down again, managing to miss Tommy by a hair. Double teaming is not fair, Tommy whined, running from the 2 of them. You 2 double teamed me in round 1, Ranbu explained, lunging at them. That was when was convenient for me, Tommy whined, faking Tubbo out and continuing to run. Ranbu sighed and turned to Tubbo, opting to try to tag him instead. Tubbo jumped back and continued to run after Tommy. However, Tommy stopped short and instead rushed at Tubbo. Tommy managed to hit Tubbo's side with his full palm, but Tubbo soon moved past him. But not for long. He stopped and slowly lowered himself to the ground. He took a couple of deep breaths, like he had the wind knocked out of him, and he shook his head. Dang, that really drains you quick, doesn't it? Tubbo asked, his normal light and joking tone still present in his voice. Tommy still winced. I know. Are you okay? He asked, dropping down next to Tubbo. He laughed. Yeah, I'm fine, although I'm a little glad you hit me instead of Ranbu, he said. What? Why? Ranbu asked, tilting his head as he stood next to the 2 of them. Because that drains your energy like a heartbeat. My powers were working against him. You would have dropped, Tubbo laughed. Tommy squirmed and shifted himself a little farther from the 2 of them than before. It wouldn't have been that bad, Ranbu hurriedly said, noticing Tommy's reaction. No, of course not, Tubbo amended. You'd just be caught off guard. Plus, you're naturally wobbly, so you'll just fall over from a push, Tubbo teased. Tommy snorted, and the 2 counted this as a win and decided to roll with it. I have balance, Ranbu complained. Not much. You tripped while standing still, Tommy recalled. It's all that height. Shrink and then we'll talk, Tubbo added. What? Tommy's tall too, he exclaimed, not actually offended. Ah, but you're taller, Tubbo answered. Too tall. Shrink, Ranboob, Tommy said. I'm not appreciated here, Ranbu deadpanned. Tubbo snorted, used to Ranbu's antics and vice versa. You'd be very appreciated if you teleported and got me water, Tommy hummed. Ranbu looked at him. It's not that far. Besides, technically you're closer, Ranbu crossed his arms. Ranbu, please teleport and get me some water, Tommy asked, doing his puppy dog eyes. Ranbu disappeared for a moment before reappearing again and handing Tommy his water. Wait, why did I do that? Ranbu asked. Tommy cackled, falling on his back and still laughing. Are you sure you don't have some secret second persuasion power? Tubbo asked in between laughs. Nope, just good old puppy dog eyes, Tommy boasted. Seriously, you get lost in those things. How are your eyes so blue? Ranbu asked, plopping down next to them. Tommy shrugged while taking a drink of water. Genetics, I guess, Tommy answered. Up for another round? Tommy is the only one who hasn't been tagged, Ranbu hummed. Give me a minute, Tubbo said. Still need to catch my breath. Sorry, you should probably take a break today. It can be disorienting, Tommy said. You're still bouncing your leg, Ranbu commented. That's because I have all my energy plus whatever the heck I stole from Tubbo. I hit him with my full palm too. It was a decent drain, Tommy commented. Tubbo threw his legs out from under him, staying laid down on the floor. Don't be sorry, Tubbo said. It was my idea to use our powers for this tag. Besides, it was fun, and it's not like I'm hurt or anything. Just winded and tired. I'm all good. Still, Tommy muttered. Nope, no still, Ranbu said. Tubbo agreed. We're all S levels. We all have dangerous powers that could hurt each other by accident. It's okay. We should probably call it then, Ranbu said. Probably, Tommy hummed. It's been a while since I willingly used my powers. For fun, nonetheless. When was the last time? Tubbo asked, turning to his side to face Tommy. I'm actually not sure there was a time. At least not that I remember. Maybe once in the compound early on? Not sure though, Tommy said. That sucks. No one should be forced to use their power or not to use them, Tubbo commented. It happens, both Ranbu and Tommy said, shrugging. That was freaky, Tubbo replied, not sounding freaked out at all. I should head back upstairs, Tommy said, stretching without standing up. Wilbur said he wanted to talk to me before he realized we were going to hang out, but he let us do this first. That was nice of him, Ranbu commented. Yeah, and kind of nerve-wracking because he said we want to talk to you rather than I, Tommy said. I hope I'm not in trouble. You're probably not, Tubbo answered. You didn't do anything wrong, Tommy shrugged. I did a lot of things wrong. Against your will, Rambo replied. Nothing you wanted to. I wanted to kick Dream's face in, Tommy said, repressing the urge to shudder at saying his name. He knew he should. It would stop giving him power over Tommy, but he still didn't like it. We're gonna, Tubbo answered confidently. We're gonna figure out where he is and we'll kick his face in and more. I could teleport him into a vat of acid, Rambo suggested. As long as the vat of acid is in the same room so we can watch it. That started a laugh out of Tommy. Rambo was often non-violent, and the fact that he was like that caught him off guard, in a good way. He was happy Rambo cared about him like that. Thank you, Tommy said. I think. Go upstairs, and if they're mad, just come to one of our floors and chill with us until they get a grip, Tubbo told him. But they won't be. You'll be fine. Rambo agreed. Don't worry. Nikki will bake you cookies if you come down. I may come down regardless then. I want cookies, Tommy said, standing up. Nikki makes the best cookies, Rambo bragged. He's not even exaggerating, Tubbo replied. She makes the literal best cookies you've ever tasted. Honestly, she makes the best food in general. Tommy groaned. Great, now you've made me hungry. He winced. I'm coming down, so tell her to make the best cookies. What kind do you want? Rambo asked. There's more than one kind? Tommy asked, having never actually eaten a cookie before. We have so much to teach you, Rambo laughed. See you later, Tommy. Tell us how it goes so we can tell you we told you so, Tubbo called, still lying on his back. Tommy flipped him off before heading to the elevator. Tommy's heart was pounding as he was met with the three of them sitting in the living room. Phil, Techno, and Wilbur, all just sitting there waiting for him. It made him want to cry. But of course he didn't. That would be embarrassing, and Tommy didn't cry, not counting the past few days anyway. Yep, Tommy said, walking over towards them. Everything okay? Yeah, don't worry, Wilbur said. We promise you're not in trouble or anything. We just wanted to ask a few questions and tell you something, if that's okay. Yeah, sure, no problem, Tommy answered, even though his heart was still pounding. You can sit down, mate, Phil laughed slightly. Tommy rolled his eyes but sat in the armchair opposite of Techno. What's up? Do you remember anything from before the compound? Phil asked. Tommy thought for a moment. He shook his head. No, my first memory that I can really remember was being cold. Like super freaking cold. And I knew it was like really bad to be that cold. Like I wasn't even shivering or anything. It was cold and dark, but I knew it wasn't supposed to be. So I guess the only thing I can remember before the compound is being warm, Tommy answered. Nothing else? Techno asked. Tommy shook his head again. Nope, he answered. Why? We wanted to know if you knew anything about your family, Wilbur replied, although he sounded disappointed. You see, Tommy, when Will and Techno and I were 11, we lost someone very important to our family. It's why we started taking down containment centers, and this whole SBI thing started, Phil said. We know how it feels to lose someone like that. I'm gonna be honest, Tommy started. I know I shouldn't, but based off of what Dream said, I don't think they wanted me. What? Wilbur stated, more than asked. Well, despite all that stuff he lied about, he was pretty honest about where we came from. He was proof, and it wasn't even from him. He proved my friend came from a containment center before the compound. He had no reason to lie to us and told me my parents kind of just handed me over when asked. I was 4, so I don't really remember, but I don't know. I don't think I want to go back to the people who gave me the dream, Tommy ranted. He was trying to explain himself even though he knew he didn't need to. Not to them. Still, it was a habit. They didn't give you up, Tommy, Wilbur said, though clenched teeth. How do you know, anyway? Tommy snorted, crossing his arms. Besides, why does it matter? I'd rather stay here than with strangers that might not let me see Tubbo or Rambo again. It's not like, or not like me for what I did, he mumbled the last part. We know who they are, who your family was, Techno answered, staring at Tommy with such intensity it made him squirm. What? How? Tommy asked. That wasn't in the file about me when I looked through it. It doesn't need to be in the file if we were your family, Tommy, Phil said. Tommy blinked once, then twice. What? He croaked. And that's the end of that chapter. And another big build-up we were leading up to, finding out that the reason why Wilbur in the story so far has been so obsessed with the Witherer is because of Tommy. And they found Tommy as a little baby, and then Dream stole him again. You know, it's probably true that Tommy's real original family did give him to Dream, and then, or, we don't know. Maybe Tommy was just an orphan or something. But then SBI found him, and they wanted him, but then
you know, they wanted, and you're all right with those comments, how they're like treating him like a dog, like, or a pet, or a little object. They're like, can we keep him? Yeah, this chapter was heartwarming. It was very nice. So, the family is reunited. What will happen next? We still need to take down the compound, and we need to find out who... We need to find out who the prophet is, who Tommy's friend is. And I was gonna maybe read another chapter, but I think the next one is too long and my voice is dying. So that's where we're going to end it for now. Bloop. Thank you all for joining us for our latest 2 chapters. We'll be back next week to read another 2 chapters, maybe 3 if we can fit it in. I hope you all enjoyed today's stream. Sorry for all the stuttering today. I don't know what's wrong with me. But I had a lot of fun. I hope you guys enjoyed it too. Nice, heartwarming chapters today. And we got 2 big reveals. So without further ado, I'll see you guys next time. Have a great rest of your day, guys. Bye-bye. Bye-bye, 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 bye-bye.